Hi everyone, Dr. Will Horton here, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about a subject that interests me. In fact, it's going to be a three-part trifecta, if you will. Part one is faith, part two is commitment, and then part three is desires, and how these three have to interact in a way like a triangle for you to really get what you want. What stops most people? And so any one of these three have to be there. It'd be like a three-legged stool or like the sides of a triangle. If one disappears, you don't have anything. So we're going to start today with faith. And the reason I want to start with faith is one of the most, to me, just from my interpretation, there's a quote people hear and then I think they look at it and assume one thing, when I would suggest if you look at it as a psychological parable rather than just a statement or a statement of fact, it gives a whole different meaning. And the statement is, all it takes is the faith of a mustard seed. Okay? And so then people means, oh, that must mean a tiny amount of faith. If I have a tiny amount of faith, then I can do what I need to do, or I will get it. So they think I just have to have a little faith. And thus we say to people, oh, have a little faith and this and that. But what if it's more of a parable, of a metaphor? Because another way to look at it, when you look at the seed, a mustard seed, yes, it's small and becomes a big mustard plant. It can only become that mustard plant. That's all it can ever do. If you take an acorn, which is not very big, bigger than a mustard seed, but it grows into the huge, huge oak tree, right? But the only thing it can become is that oak tree. It has absolute faith, and it's sealed within itself that this must come to pass. It's sealed within itself. This must come to pass. It's not a maybe. There's no wavering. There's no negotiation. This is what will be. Right? So when I think of faith, I look at it as the idea that what it is you have to have faith in. You know, what you want, you have to have total faith in, total commitment, total faith. So it goes from faith to commitment, and it's about your desire, which links back into the faith and the commitment and everything else. But when you look at this total faith, what does that mean? That means having an unwavering desire, you know, that this is going to come to pass. You know, people that study like the law of attraction and the metaphysical aspects of this, they talk about, you know, that you have to adjust your energy, that you have to vibrate at that level. Well, it's also one way of thinking that you have to become, and you hear many people talk about you have to be before you can achieve. If you're working toward a goal, you have to be before you can achieve. So one way to think about that is like a seed. That's the only thing you can become, is that person that you want to be, or this idea that you want to manifest. You have to have faith that it will happen, and you have to block out the outside world. You have to block out everything around it to let that begin to nurture and grow. And then when you have that faith, well, first of all, of course, it has to be planted in a fertile ground, which means your subconscious mind. It has to be planted and then nurtured. You know? If you plant a seed and dig it up and look at it, plant a seed, dig it up and look at it, plant a seed, dig it up and look at it, it's never going to come to pass. And when it first starts to break through the earth, if you will, into the daylight, it's very vulnerable. You know, farmers are usually very terrified, you know, when the crops are just coming up, when the seeds are just starting to sprout. You know, a good rain will wash it away. That's the worst time to get the big rain. Or if it's super dry and the sun's beating down, it'll burn up, right? It has to have the proper environment when it first breaks free. That's when it's the most vulnerable. So when you have this faith and it starts to manifest, and it you know, it's not going to turn. It doesn't manifest as the oak seed doesn't manifest. An acorn doesn't manifest as a 100-foot oak tree. It has to grow, it has to nurture, it has to grow out, just like the mustard seed. So, you know, it has to be, and it's very vulnerable when it comes out. It's much like, you know, when a caterpillar goes into the cocoon, it has to go in there, and it totally reshapes itself. It totally melts down and reforms. It's in its DNA. That's one of the interesting things. It's in its DNA to become the butterfly. Right? It is there. It has to happen, but it has to go in that cocoon, and it has to totally change. And then once it changes, however, it comes out of the cocoon, and we know that. But people forget that for the first few hours, when it comes out of that cocoon, it's the most vulnerable it'll ever be. right? It's because its swings are wet, it can't fly. So there's a few hours that it's vulnerable to the elements, if you will. So when you look at a seed sprouting, and if this is your faith and it starts to sprout, you start to see little bits of it. You start to see little bits of it, as they say, in that thing where it says, pray in private to be rewarded openly. So when you first see the evidence of it, it starts to do that. Well, that's when you're the most vulnerable. And that's why I always say the people that you expect to support you sometimes are the ones that sabotage you. Right? Being in the addiction world for almost 40 years now, you think all these people are going to support you when you go to make a major change, and some won't out of fear. It's like when they talk about you put a crab in a bucket. If you're fishing, you're going to use crab as bait. You have to put a lid on the bucket, or the crab will climb out. But once you get a couple of crabs in there, you can take the several, like 3, you can throw the lid away because they'll keep climbing out. Or as they start to climb out, one crab will pull the other down, pull the other down. And I like to think that what begins to happen, let's say you've got the faith, you've got the desire and the commitment, and you start manifesting something, that's threatening to everyone else around you because they want to change. They want to change, but they have no real desire and they have no real commitment, the things we'll talk about next. So rather than say, good for you, they try to pull you back down. So when that plants, that idea is just starting to sprout, when you come out of the cocoon and you're there, you're vulnerable. That's when you need to surround yourself the most with people that are going to nurture you, that are people that are going to support you. Many motivational speakers, especially on the finance side, talk about, if we know the 5 people you hang out with the most, and we kind of average their income, yours is probably in there. And there, this has been researched and somewhat true, especially 5 people you hang out at work. That's the people that your income is. But I think that this level of 5 is also very impactful for 2 other reasons. And that is, one is it's about raising your standards. If you're hanging around with this group and they're here, well, you want to be there. Now, again, maybe there's a subconscious fear. If I rise up, I got to leave these people. They may pull me down, or all of a sudden, you're disconnected. You think you're better than us and all this other stuff. Again, you think they'd support you, maybe not. But it's also true in other areas, not just things like that. If you have a group of friends that are in great physical shape and you spend a lot of time with them, chances are you're in great physical shape, right? If almost everybody you hang out with is, their idea of a workout is walking to get another piece of pizza and beer out of the refrigerator, chances are, if that's the only people you hang out with, you're not going to be in great shape. I've always heard it said from relationship coaches, people that are in healthy, good relationships have friends that are in healthy and good relationships, right? So you could think about that. And to me, it's about raising that standard. If this is the standard, you're going to rise to it, right? And this, again, goes back and feeds the faith because you see other people doing it, which can nurture your faith. It can water that seed. It can nurture that sprout. It can help protect it. Because many of those people, if you're almost in that group, well, hey, come on up, and they want to help you generally. So it's about raising your standards. I remember one time hearing someone talk about, they wondered why there was these, it was a Marine Corps story, and he said, what it makes him wonder, I think he was a general, said, these young men and women, many of them especially in their first enlistment or their first tour as an officer, are at the highest level they're going to be. And he goes, they get out of the Marines, they get out of the Corps, and a few years later, they're not as motivated. They're not as strict. And he was wondering, well, does that mean people constantly need to be berated, need to be, motivated externally? Because that's one of the things the military does. You always have people motivating you and getting you to do better. But what if it's not so much that, it's the standard, it's the group you're with, And there's many times, as my friend Billy would say, you see people, if they go into a high performance unit, right, their performance goes up because that just becomes the standard, but you take a high performer out of that unit, you put them in a lower performing unit, either they lower their standards or they have to leave because they don't fit in. It's one of the reasons sometimes you see people that were real high performance military, when that part of their career is over, sometimes they have trouble adjusting going back to the fleet or to the divisions, things like that, because it's not the same standard. So it's about raising your standard, but I think raising your standard feeds that faith that I can do it. I see other people do it, therefore we can do it. So the idea of having the faith of a mustard seed means that you have absolute faith that this will come to pass. And it's going to be sealed within itself. That's the only thing it can be. You're not expecting less. You're not negotiating. This is what you expect. And then, of course, it has to be planted in a fertile place. It has to be nurtured until it can begin to sprout, if you will. And then it really has to be nurtured and protected, especially from the elements, especially the destructive elements. Of course, in nature, it's rain, scorching sun, predators, things like that, the people that will destroy it. And we have to become cognizant of realizing they could be people near us, could be coworkers. Doesn't mean you don't necessarily love them, but that's where maybe the statement of, pray in private to be rewarded openly, but nurture it, keep it close to you, because that's how it can grow. That's how you can nurture it. That's how we can really begin to do it. So think about faith. And one way to do it is, how do you have absolute faith? I want to close with, how do you know you have absolute faith? When something's going on, how do you have faith that it's going to happen? Where do you see it? Where do you hear it? Where do you feel it? What color pops in your mind when you think about, I knew this was going to happen? I meditated on it, I prayed on it, or I visualized it, whatever you do, but I knew it was going to happen. How did you know it was going to happen? And then go back and deconstruct it and say, okay, did it just pop, or was it an incremental step, right? I'm not sure, but whatever it was, once you do this, so the next time you develop something you want to have faith in, you need to duplicate those submodalities of what it was, so you can begin to develop total faith in that it's going to work for you. So thank you for being with me and enjoying this part 1 of faith. Coming up is commitment and coincidence. Part 2 is commitment and coincidence, and part 3 is desire, right? So we're going to have a lot of fun with this. So it's faith, commitment, and coincidence, and then desire. And when you put all these 3 together, it becomes a triangle or a 3-legged stool that you can build on. So thank you, and I look forward to talking to you soon. Keep in touch.